No cleaner lasted a week with the Millionaire's twins, until the black woman showed up and said, "I can't take it anymore. Those girls are evil," screamed Carmen, the 15th cleaner, running out the front door of the mansion with a broom still in her hand and tears streaming down her face. Her clothes were soaked in blue paint, and small pieces of confetti stuck to her disheveled hair. Mr. Davidson, a billionaire real estate mogul, sighed heavily as he signed yet another termination check. In just 8 months, 15 cleaning professionals had quit their jobs after facing the diabolical antics of his 9-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Ella. "Please, Carmen, reconsider. I'll double your salary," begged the desperate man. "Mr. Davidson, it's not about the money," she shouted from the gate. "Your daughters put glue on the bathroom door handle, replaced the soap with paint, and set a trap with buckets of cold water at the pantry door. Yesterday I found a toy snake in my purse that looked so real I almost had a heart attack." From the top of the Italian marble staircase, Emma and Ella watched the scene with angelic smiles that contrasted completely with their destructive acts. Green-eyed blondes, they looked like 2 perfect dolls when they weren't terrorizing adult employees. "Bye, Carmen." Emma waved sweetly. "We'll miss you," Ella added with false innocence. Carmen shuddered and ran away, muttering something about seeking therapy. Mr. Davidson turned to his daughters, exhausted. Since the death of his wife Linda in an accident 3 years ago, the girls had become increasingly uncontrollable. "Girls, this has to stop. 15 cleaners in 8 months. "But Dad," said Emma, descending the stairs elegantly, "they were all incompetent and boring." "None of them understood us," added Ella, joining her sister. That afternoon, just as Mr. Davidson was about to give up on hiring anyone else, his secretary Margaret knocked on his office door with a hopeful expression. "Sir, there is one last option. My cousin knows a woman who has special experience with difficult cases." "What kind of experience?" "Well, her name is Grace Williams. She's 42 years old, raised 7 children as a single mother, and has worked with some of the most troubled families in the city. They say she can handle any child, no matter how impossible." Mr. Davidson was desperate. "Does she have a background in child psychology?" "Actually, no. She didn't even finish high school. But she has something the others didn't have. She grew up facing real hardship and knows how to recognize pain disguised as anger." "Set up an interview." Grace Williams arrived the next morning driving a faded blue Honda Civic that contrasted sharply with the luxury cars in the driveway. At 42, she was a woman of average height with curly hair pulled back into a practical bun and eyes that seemed to have seen a lot of life. She wasn't intimidated by the mansion's opulence. She calmly observed the scratches on the walls, the poorly concealed stains on the Persian rug, and the broken and poorly repaired vases. "They're creative," she commented, pointing to crayon marks on the wall. "The girls?" "Yes, very creative," Mr. Davidson admitted sheepishly. "I wasn't being sarcastic. Destructive creativity often hides unprocessed pain." During their conversation, Grace heard the whole story: Linda's death, the girls' refusal to go to therapy, the increasingly elaborate acts of sabotage. "They want to meet me now," Grace said simply. They went up to the girls' room, where Emma and Ella appeared wearing identical pink dresses, their hair perfectly styled and smiles that would have made any commercial jealous. "Hello," Emma said sweetly. "I'm Emma." "And I'm Ella," her sister added. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Grace watched them for a long moment, not fooled by their angelic facade. "Which one of you had the idea to put glue on the doorknob?" The question caught the girls off guard. Emma's smile faltered slightly. "We don't know what you're talking about," Ella said, keeping her tone innocent. Grace smiled for the first time. "All right. You can keep up the charade for now." Something in Grace's calm tone and penetrating gaze made the girls exchange nervous glances. It was the first time an adult had ever seemed to see them completely, not just the sweet facade, but the emotional storm behind it. As they descended the stairs, Emma whispered to Ella, "This one is different from the others." "Yes," Ella agreed, feeling a strange chill in her stomach. "She doesn't seem afraid." Grace waved goodbye, but her last words echoed through the mansion with a quiet authority that made even Mr. Davidson shiver. "Girls, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And just so you know, I'm not leaving in the first week, or the first month, or when you try to scare me away. I'm here to stay until you no longer need to test whether adults really care." The twins stood frozen at the top of the stairs, processing those words. For 3 years, they had managed to push away everyone who tried to get close to them. But something in her voice suggested that the war they were used to winning was about to take a completely unexpected turn. If you're enjoying this story of overcoming adversity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Grace would do in the next few days would prove that sometimes the most underestimated person is exactly the one who has the power to change everything. Grace arrived the next morning at 7 o'clock sharp, carrying a simple backpack and a smile that showed neither nervousness nor false confidence. Mr. Davidson greeted her with an expression that suggested he had spent the entire night wondering how he would explain to Margaret that yet another cleaning lady had quit before even finishing her first day. "The girls are having breakfast," he said, pointing to the kitchen. "I have to leave for an important meeting, but I'll be back at noon." "Perfect," Grace replied simply. "The three of us need to get to know each other better." Emma and Ella had spent the entire night planning their quick expulsion operation. The plan was simple: intense psychological shocks from the very first hour to break her confidence before she could settle in. When Grace entered the kitchen, the girls were sitting angelically, eating cereal and pretending to study for school. On the table, strategically placed, was an old doll with blonde hair identical to theirs. "Good morning, girls," said Grace, heading straight for the refrigerator. "Good morning, Grace," they replied in unison, watching her every move. Grace opened the refrigerator and found exactly what she expected: a severed doll's head in the vegetable compartment, ketchup smeared to look like blood, and a note that read "Leave while you can" written in childish handwriting on crumpled paper. Instead of screaming or showing shock, Grace simply picked up the doll's head, wiped the ketchup off with a dish towel, and carefully placed it next to the whole doll on the table. "Someone lost this," she said calmly, continuing to search for ingredients for breakfast. Emma and Ella exchanged confused glances. That wasn't the reaction they had expected. "Grace," Emma said sweetly, "weren't you scared? By a doll's head covered in ketchup? Honey, I've raised 7 children. I've cleaned up things much worse than that." Ella tried a different approach. "Sometimes strange things happen in this house. Supernatural things." Grace stopped what she was doing and looked directly at them. "You know something interesting about ghosts? They never need to use ketchup from the refrigerator. They usually have more authentic methods." The second phase of the plan went into action during the cleaning. While Grace was vacuuming the living room carpet, Emma discreetly unplugged the vacuum cleaner. When Grace tried to continue and realized it had stopped, she simply plugged it back in without comment. This happened 3 more times. On the 4th, Grace calmly turned to Emma, who was innocently playing with dolls on the sofa. "Emma, come here, please." The girl approached, prepared to deny any involvement. "Would you like to help me with the cleaning? You seem very interested in how the vacuum cleaner works." "I wasn't doing anything," Emma said defensively. "I know. But since you've been standing so close to the outlet for the last 20 minutes, I thought you might want to learn how to use appliances properly. You never know when those skills might come in handy." It was a genuine offer, without accusation or direct confrontation. Emma was taken aback. During lunch, the girls carried out their third attempt: sabotaged food. They had prepared a sandwich for Grace with toothpaste instead of mayonnaise and salt instead of sugar in her juice. Grace took a bite of the sandwich, made a discreet face, and put it aside. "You know, girls, I grew up very poor. There were times when I ate anything I could find, including toothpaste when there was nothing else to satisfy my hunger." The girls stopped eating, shocked by the naturalness of the revelation. "You ate toothpaste?" asked Ella, momentarily forgetting to maintain her angelic facade. "When you're really hungry, you learn that survival is more important than taste. But today we have better options, don't we?" Grace stood up and made fresh sandwiches for everyone, including herself. "Who wants to help me make something really tasty?" For the first time since she had arrived, the girls seemed genuinely interested in something other than their mischief. As they prepared the sandwiches together, Ella asked timidly, "Grace, why didn't you get mad at us?" "Why would I get mad?" "Because we tried to scare you away." Grace stopped cutting the bread and looked at the 2 girls. "Do you want me to leave?" "Yes," Emma said quickly. "No," Ella said at the same time. The sisters looked at each other, surprised by the contradiction. "Interesting," Grace commented. "Emma, why do you want me to leave?" Because everyone else is leaving. You should leave too." "What about you, Ella? Why don't you want me to leave?" Ella hesitated, her defenses beginning to crumble. Because you didn't yell at us. You weren't scared. You made us sandwiches. Grace sat down at the girls' level. Can I tell you a secret? They nodded. I also lost my mother when I was 9. And I know exactly how it feels to feel that everyone you let get close to you will eventually leave and leave you alone again. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Emma's eyes began to fill with tears, which she quickly tried to hide. How did you know? Ella whispered. Because children who try to scare adults aren't usually trying to be mean. They're trying to protect themselves. It's easier to make someone go away out of fear than to wait for them to abandon you by choice. Emma finally broke down. We don't want you to like us and then leave like everyone else. Grace opened her arms, and for the first time in 3 years, the girls ran into the embrace of an adult other than their father. Girls, Grace said softly, I'm not here because I need money. I'm here because 2 very special girls need to learn that not all adults disappear when things get tough. When Mr. Davidson returned home that afternoon, he was greeted by a scene he hadn't witnessed in years, his daughters willingly helping with chores, talking animatedly, and, most surprising of all, genuinely smiling. How was your first day? He asked cautiously. Educational, Grace replied with a mysterious smile. For all of us. That night, as he tucked the girls into bed, Emma asked a question that revealed the depth of her trauma. Grace, do you promise you won't die in a car accident like our mom? The question hit Grace like a bolt of lightning, finally revealing the true root of the girl's behavior. It wasn't just fear of abandonment, it was terror of permanent loss. Emma, no one can promise they'll never die. But I can promise that as long as I'm alive, you'll always have a place in my heart. And if anything happens to me, you'll already know that you're loved and special enough to win over anyone good who comes into your lives. Ella, who had been pretending to be asleep, whispered, The other cleaners were afraid of us. Are you afraid of anything? Grace thought for a moment. I'm afraid I won't be able to help you see how extraordinary you are. I'm afraid you'll grow up thinking you have to be perfect to deserve love. The next morning, something unprecedented happened. The girls came down for breakfast, and instead of setting traps, they had set the table and tried to make pancakes, though they had made a considerable mess in the process. Surprise! They shouted when Grace entered the kitchen. Looking at those 2 flour-covered girls desperately trying to please someone for the first time in years, Grace felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. She knew she had won the first battle, but the emotional war to heal those wounded souls was just beginning. What Grace couldn't predict was that Mr. Davidson, watching his daughters show genuine affection for an adult for the first time in years, was about to make a decision that would completely change the dynamics of this unlikely family. 3 weeks later, the girls' transformation was so remarkable that Mr. Davidson decided to throw a joint birthday party for Emma and Ella, the first real celebration since Linda's death. He invited co-workers, neighbors from the local elite, and other wealthy families in the neighborhood, eager to show off how his daughters had finally become civilized. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore, wife of a federal judge and unofficial queen of the local high society, arrived with her daughter Madison, a 10-year-old blonde girl known for her inherited arrogance. Patricia watched Grace arranging the plates in the kitchen and made sure to comment loudly enough to be heard. Davidson, are you sure it's safe to leave that person alone with valuables in the house? Especially during a party. Mr. Davidson was embarrassed. Patricia, Grace is completely trustworthy. She has completely transformed my daughters. Honey, these people have their methods. They know how to appear trustworthy until they get what they want, she whispered, adjusting her expensive jewelry. My previous maid seemed like an angel until we found out she was selling information about our house to burglars. Grace continued setting the table, pretending not to listen, but Emma and Ella caught every word. Their expressions changed instantly, the old defensive anger returning to their eyes. During the party, Madison Whitmore approached the twins with her usual superiority. I hear you were impossible before this nanny arrived. My mom says people like her know how to control children because they grew up with violence. Grace isn't our nanny, Emma said coldly. She's our family. Family. Madison laughed cruelly. She's a black maid, Emma. Do you really think she cares about you, or does she just want your daddy's money? Ella felt tears of anger burning in her eyes. You don't know anything about Grace. I know enough. My mom says people like her are dangerous. They pretend to be nice to get into rich people's houses, and then... Grace appeared softly beside the girls, carrying a tray of sweets. Madison, would you like to try one of these brownies? I made them especially for the party. The girl looked at Grace with obvious disdain. I don't eat food made by people like you. You never know what kind of things you put in your food. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma and Ella were stunned by the blatant cruelty. Grace, however, kept her gentle smile, as if she hadn't heard the insult. No problem. There are plenty of other options on the table, she said calmly, walking away. Later that night, after all the guests had left, Emma exploded. Grace, why didn't you say anything to that horrible girl? She was awful to you. And why didn't you tell Daddy what her mother was saying? Added Ella, still furious. Grace sat down next to them on the sofa. Girls, do you want to know a secret about people like Patricia and Madison? They nodded eagerly. They're so afraid of losing what they think makes them special, money, status, skin color, that they spend their whole lives trying to make others feel small so they can feel big. It's sadder than it is mean. But they were cruel to you. And you think their opinion of me matters more than yours? Emma and Ella were silent, processing. Grace, Emma said slowly, have you been treated like this before? Many times. But you know what I've learned? The best response to prejudice isn't anger. It's success. It's being so good at what you do that they can't ignore you anymore. Like what? Grace smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I have some plans that will make it impossible for people like Patricia to continue underestimating me. The next morning, while Mr. Davidson was in his office, Grace made a phone call that the girls shouldn't have overheard, but they did. Dr. Sarah Mitchell? This is Grace Williams. Remember me from community college? Yes, I know it was 20 years ago, but I need a favor. That research I was doing on child development in trauma. Do you still have the contacts for that publisher? Emma and Ella exchanged confused glances. Grace had gone to college? I have new data, Sarah. 3 years working with cases considered impossible, including a family here who may completely change our understanding of how children process grief. Grace noticed the girls listening and smiled. Girls, come here. We need to talk about something important. They approached timidly. Did you know that our journey together, the whole transformation we've been through, could help other families going through the same thing? How? Ella asked. There's a national conference on child development in 3 months. Dr. Mitchell wants me to present a case study on trauma recovery in children. Of course, without using your real names or personal details. Emma frowned. You're going to talk about us? I'm going to talk about how 2 extraordinary girls proved that love, patience, and understanding can heal any emotional wound. And how a community that initially underestimated them ended up learning valuable lessons about family, prejudice, and second chances. The girls processed the information slowly. Grace, Emma said, will Patricia Whitmore be at this conference? Grace smiled almost imperceptibly. Interesting that you should ask. She's the chairwoman of several children's charities in the city. She'll probably be a special guest. That evening, Mr. Davidson found Grace working on her laptop in the kitchen, surrounded by papers and notes. Grace, what's all this? A little presentation, Mr. Davidson. About child development and overcoming prejudice. Nothing you need to worry about. He flipped through a few pages and his face gradually changed. Grace, this data is incredible. You documented the girl's entire transformation. Among other things. Do you have training for this? Grace looked at him directly. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from community college and was in the middle of my master's when I had to stop to raise my children. But I never stopped studying, Mr. Davidson. I never stopped learning. For the first time, he realized that he had completely underestimated the woman who had saved his family. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you didn't ask. You needed someone to take care of your daughters, not an academic resume. But now, she smiled. Now I have something more important than degrees. I have results. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. Grace, can I ask you a question? Always. When you present our story, will people understand that families can be different and still be perfect? Grace hugged the girl. That's exactly the message, sweetheart. Mr. Davidson watched the scene, finally understanding that Grace wasn't just an exceptional employee. She was a force of nature who was about to confront years of prejudice and underestimation in a way no one could have predicted. What Patricia Whitmore and the entire local elite didn't know was that they had underestimated not just a nanny, but a woman whose intelligence, education, and experience were about to rewrite the rules of the game in a way that would forever change how they viewed family, class, and true human value. The National Conference on Child Development took place at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most prestigious event in the industry. Patricia Whitmore arrived wearing a Chanel suit and her most expensive diamonds, greeting fellow charity board members with air kisses and calculated smiles. "Darling, I hear we're in for a special presentation today. Something about alternative methods with troubled children," she commented to Mrs. Robertson, another socialite in the circle. "Oh yes, some person who works with dysfunctional families. Probably just another one of those progressive theories with no real scientific basis." Across the auditorium, Grace discreetly adjusted her laptop, wearing a simple but impeccable navy blazer. Mr. Davidson was sitting in the front row with Emma and Ella, who had insisted on attending Grace's presentation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell took the stage to introduce her. "Our next speaker has developed a revolutionary methodology for childhood trauma intervention, with documented results of 100% success in cases considered impossible. Please welcome Grace Williams, child development researcher and expert in complex family dynamics." Patricia almost dropped her champagne glass when Grace stepped onto the stage with absolute confidence. "Isn't that the Davidsons' maid?" Grace began her presentation with a clear, authoritative voice that immediately commanded the attention of the entire audience of 300 professionals. "Good morning. Today I'm going to share how unconscious adult biases can perpetuate trauma in children, and how true healing comes from authentic connections, not social credentials." The first part focused on the science behind childhood trauma, citing studies from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford with a fluency that made it clear Grace had completely mastered the academic field. "Now, let me present a real-life case study," Grace said, clicking to the next slide. Two 9-year-old girls, Emma and Ella, who in 8 months drove away 15 qualified professionals through destructive behaviors. Emma and Ella looked at each other proudly when their photos appeared on the screen, obviously with prior permission. Grace continued narrating the entire transformation, showing emotional progress charts, behavioral data, and video testimonials from the girls themselves explaining how they felt before and after the intervention. "The determining factor was not my academic background," said Grace, looking directly at Patricia in the audience. "It was my ability to recognize that children labeled impossible are often just protecting broken hearts from adults who judge them superficially." Patricia was visibly uncomfortable, whispering nervously to her colleagues. "But what was most interesting," Grace continued, "was observing how class and racial biases among some adults in the community nearly sabotaged the healing process for these children." Grace clicked to the next slide, which showed an exact transcript of the prejudiced conversations Patricia had had at the party, obviously recorded by the girls themselves without anyone's knowledge. Children absorb discriminatory messages from the adults around them. When a child hears someone question the integrity of his caregiver based solely on skin color, it reactivates trauma of abandonment. The room fell silent as Grace played the audio from the party, Patricia's unmistakable voice saying, "These people know how to sound trustworthy until they get what they want." Patricia turned pale, realizing she had been publicly exposed to hundreds of influential professionals in her field. "Fortunately," Grace said with a serene smile, "the girls have learned that the opinions of people limited by prejudice do not define their worth or the worth of the people who love them." Dr. Mitchell resumed the microphone for questions. The first came from a Columbia professor, Ms. Williams. "Where did you complete your graduate studies?" "Master's degree in child psychology from State University, with a specialization in family development. My thesis on intersections between social class and therapeutic effectiveness was published by the Journal of Child Development last year." Murmurs of impression ran through the audience. Even Patricia had to admit that she had completely underestimated Grace. A second question: "Can your methods be replicated by other professionals?" "Absolutely. In fact, I just signed a contract to publish a book detailing the complete methodology. Authentic Connections: Healing Trauma Through Unconditional Love will be released by Harvard University Press next year." The audience erupted in applause. Patricia realized that not only had she been publicly humiliated, but Grace would now be recognized nationally as an expert in her field. When Grace stepped off the stage, a line of professionals formed to request consultations, partnerships, and interviews. Mr. Davidson approached with the girls. "Grace, I didn't know you were so academically renowned. Mr. Davidson, you hired a nanny. Now you have a family friend who also happens to be one of the country's leading experts on childhood trauma." Emma hugged Grace. "Grace, now everyone knows how special you are." "No, honey. Now everyone knows how special you two are. I've always known." Across the room, Patricia watched the scene with a mixture of shame and anger. She had publicly belittled a woman who was now being celebrated as a pioneer in her field, and worse, her prejudiced attitudes had been exposed to the entire professional community she valued so highly. Mrs. Robertson approached Patricia. "Darling, perhaps you should refrain from commenting on people you clearly don't know very well." While Grace was surrounded by professional admirers and job offers, a quiet transformation swept through the hall, prejudices being questioned, assumptions being dismantled, and a new understanding of human value taking shape. Like a symphony that finally finds its harmony after years of discordant notes, the presentation proved that true excellence transcends all barriers imposed by those who fear to recognize greatness where they least expect to find it. 6 months after the conference, Grace received an unexpected phone call. "Ms. Williams, this is Patricia Whitmore. I would like to publicly apologize for my behavior at the girls' party." Grace smiled, remembering the woman who had tried to humiliate her. "Patricia, thank you for calling, but you don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to your own daughters for the example you set." Meanwhile, Emma and Ella ran to show her the local newspaper. "Grace, look. You're on the front page." The headline read, "Local Expert Transforms Child Development Methods Nationally." The photo showed Grace receiving an Academic Excellence Award from the university president. Mr. Davidson appeared, smiling. "Grace," the publisher called, "your second book already has 50,000 pre-orders." "And you know what's best," said Emma, hugging Grace. "Now everyone knows that family isn't about color, it's about love." Patricia, on the other hand, had lost her position on 3 charity boards after her public exposure. Her reputation in high society never fully recovered. Grace's real victory wasn't just professional, it was proving that competence, love, and intelligence overcome any prejudice. As she always told the girls, the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply to be extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true talent always finds its way, no matter where the journey begins.